You're not a real Whitmore. You never have been." My mother's words echoed through the elegant dining room of our family estate, cutting through the polite conversation like a knife through silk. Around us, 30 relatives sat frozen, their forks suspended midair, their eyes darting between my mother and me. It was Thanksgiving dinner, the one day a year when the entire Whitmore clan gathered to celebrate our family's legacy. A legacy built on 3 generations of successful bakeries that had made our name famous across the entire Southeast. My mother, Constance Whitmore, sat at the head of the table like a queen surveying her kingdom. At 62, she still carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who believed breeding and bloodlines meant everything. I should have expected this. The signs had been there for weeks. The hushed phone calls that stopped when I entered rooms. The way my younger brother, Preston, smirked whenever our mother mentioned the family business. But hearing it spoken aloud, in front of everyone, still felt like a punch to the stomach. I looked around the table at my aunts, uncles, and cousins. Not one of them would meet my eyes. They all knew something I didn't. What I didn't know was that this moment of public humiliation would become the foundation of my greatest triumph. My name is Josephine Whitmore, and at 34 years old, I had just discovered that everything I believed about my place in this family was a lie. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my mother's approval. While my brother Preston partied through college, I graduated top of my class in business and culinary arts. While he crashed 3 cars and got arrested twice for drunk driving, I worked 18-hour days learning every aspect of Whitmore bakeries. I had developed 17 of our most popular recipes. I had modernized our ordering systems, cutting costs by 30%. I had personally trained over 200 employees across our 12 locations. But none of that mattered to Constance Whitmore. "What is this about, Mother?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "I've decided to restructure the family business. Preston will be taking over as CEO starting January 1st. Your services will no longer be required." Preston, who had shown up to work maybe 50 times in the past year. Preston, who couldn't tell the difference between yeast and baking powder. Preston, who was currently picking at his teeth with a fingernail. The room remained silent. Not one family member spoke up in my defense. "I don't understand," I said, though understanding was beginning to dawn with terrible clarity. "I've given 15 years to this company." "And we appreciate your dedication," my mother replied, her tone suggesting she appreciated it about as much as she appreciated a hangnail. "But Whitmore Bakeries needs leadership that reflects our family values, our bloodline." There it was again, that word, bloodline. My Aunt Cordelia, who had always been kind to me growing up, finally spoke. "Constance, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Josephine deserves to know the truth. Everyone here already does." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded document, sliding it across the polished mahogany table toward me. "I found this while going through your father's papers after he passed last year. I've had it verified by 3 different laboratories." My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. The words blurred together at first, but one phrase stood out in stark black letters. "Probability of paternity, 0%. "Harold Whitmore was not your biological father," my mother announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your mother had an affair before she died. You are not a true Whitmore." The room spun around me. My father, Harold Whitmore, had adopted me when he married my biological mother, Eleanor, when I was just 2 years old. Eleanor had died in a car accident when I was 5. Harold had raised me as his own ever since. He never treated me differently from Preston, his biological son from a previous marriage. He taught me to bake in our first tiny shop. He told me I had flour in my veins. He made me believe I belonged. But he had been dead for 14 months now. He couldn't defend me. He couldn't explain. And my mother clearly had no interest in honoring his memory or his wishes. "Dad wanted me to have a place in this company," I managed to say. "It's in his will." Harold's will specified that his biological children would inherit equal shares of Whitmore bakeries. My mother replied coolly. Since you are not his biological child, you have no legal claim. I looked at Preston, who was examining his fingernails with exaggerated boredom. Had he known about this? Had he been waiting for this moment? The smirk that crossed his face answered my question. This is wrong, I said. Dad loved me. He wanted me to carry on his legacy. What your father wanted is no longer relevant, my mother stated flatly. He's gone. I control the board now, and I have decided that the Whitmore name should be carried forward by actual Whitmores. She gestured to a man I hadn't noticed before, sitting in the corner of the room. This is Bernard from our legal team. He has paperwork for you to sign acknowledging your termination and relinquishing any claims to company assets. I stared at the stack of documents Bernard placed in front of me. My 15 years of work, my innovations, my recipes reduced to a pile of paper designed to make me disappear. You have until December 31st to vacate your office, my mother continued, sipping her wine as if we were discussing the weather. I trust you'll make this transition smooth. We wouldn't want any unpleasantness. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Fight this, and she would make my life miserable in ways I couldn't imagine. Everyone at the table waited for my response. They expected tears. They expected begging. They expected me to crumble under the weight of this public humiliation. Instead, I smiled. I understand completely, I said, pushing the documents back across the table. I'll review these with my own attorney. The drive home from the Whitmore estate took 45 minutes. I spent every second of it on the phone with Rosalind Quinn, the intellectual property lawyer I had quietly retained 6 months ago. Not because I had anticipated this exact scenario, but because I had noticed discrepancies in how my mother was handling company assets after my father's death. I had wanted to protect myself. I just never imagined I would need protection from my own family. Tell me again about the recipes, Rosalind said, her voice crackling through my car speakers. I developed them on my own time, I explained, before I became a salaried employee. Evenings and weekends, in my apartment kitchen. I have dated notebooks with every formula, every modification, every test batch. And you never signed anything transferring ownership to Whitmore Bakeries. I never signed anything at all. My father always said the recipes were mine. He treated them as personal contributions to the family legacy. Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Josephine, I need you to understand something. 17 proprietary recipes that have generated millions in revenue could be worth a fortune. If you can prove independent development, you may have significant leverage. I'm not looking for leverage, I replied. I'm looking for justice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my small apartment surrounded by 15 years of notebooks, photographs, and memories. Every recipe I had created was documented in meticulous detail. Dates, ingredients, techniques, failed attempts. My father had taught me to keep records of everything. Document your process, Josephine, he would say. A recipe isn't just ingredients, it's a story. I had never questioned why he was so insistent. Now I wondered if he had known this day might come, if he had been trying to protect me in his own way. I pulled out the oldest notebook, dated from when I was 19. Inside, I found a folded letter in my father's handwriting that I had never noticed before. My dearest Josephine, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means the truth has come out and I'm no longer there to protect you. Please know that biology never mattered to me. You are my daughter in every way that counts. You have my passion, my creativity, my love for this craft. No piece of paper can take that away. I cried for the first time that night, not from sadness, but from gratitude. My father had believed in me. Now it was time to believe in myself. The next morning, I walked into Whitmore Bakery's headquarters for what everyone assumed would be my last few weeks. But I wasn't there to pack up my office. I was there to work. I greeted the staff as I always did. I checked on production. I reviewed inventory. I acted as if nothing had changed. And I watched. I watched as Preston arrived at 11:30, hungover and irritable. I watched as he spent 2 hours in his new corner office playing video games on his phone. I watched as he signed documents without reading them, approved budgets without understanding them. By noon, I had confirmed what I suspected. My mother and brother had no idea how to actually run this business. They saw the Whitmore name as their birthright. They saw the bakeries as cash machines. They had no concept of the work that made it all possible. For 2 weeks, I documented everything. Every decision Preston made, every shortcut he approved, every safety protocol he ignored to cut costs. I wasn't planning to use this information maliciously. I was simply preparing for the inevitable. When Whitmore bakeries began to struggle, my mother would need someone to blame. December 15th arrived with a certified letter from Bernard the lawyer. My termination was now official. I had 2 weeks to clear out my desk and hand over all company property. The letter specifically demanded the return of all recipes, formulas, and proprietary information developed during my employment. I called Rosalind. "They're claiming ownership of your independent work," she confirmed after reviewing the letter. "But they don't have documentation proving the recipes were developed as part of your employment. You do have documentation proving they weren't. What are my options? We file for trademark protection on every recipe you developed independently. We establish your brand separate from Whitmore Bakeries, and then we wait." Wait for what? For them to realize that without your recipes, they don't have a competitive advantage. Then we negotiate from a position of strength. I spent that evening reviewing my options. I could fight quietly through legal channels, or I could do something that would change everything. I chose to do something. On December 20th, I filed trademark applications for 17 recipes under a new company name, Josephine's Heritage Baking. The name was deliberate. My father had always called our family recipes part of our heritage. Now that heritage would belong to me. But I didn't stop there. Using connections I had built over 15 years in the industry, I reached out to every supplier, distributor, and retail partner Whitmore Bakeries depended on. I didn't badmouth my family. I didn't make accusations. I simply let people know that I was starting my own venture and would be taking my original recipes with me. The response was overwhelming. "Josephine, you're the reason we partnered with Whitmore," said Mitchell Thompson, owner of the largest grocery chain in our region. "If you're starting something new, we want to be part of it." Within 1 week, I had secured preliminary distribution agreements that would have taken anyone else years to negotiate. My reputation, built over 15 years of honest work and genuine relationships, was worth more than I had ever realized. My mother had tried to strip away my identity. Instead, she had freed me to build something entirely my own. Christmas Day at the Whitmore estate was a tradition I had participated in for over 3 decades. This year, I was not invited. I spent the holiday in my apartment, finalizing business plans and preparing for the battle ahead. My phone buzzed occasionally with texts from cousins who had witnessed my humiliation at Thanksgiving. "Sorry about what happened. Mom says we can't talk to you anymore. Preston's already screwing things up at the bakeries." I didn't respond to any of them. Their sympathy was too little, too late. On December 28th, I received a furious phone call from my mother. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I've heard you've been contacting our partners, trying to steal our business relationships." "I haven't stolen anything," I replied calmly. "I've been building my own relationships based on my own reputation." "You're trying to destroy this family." "No, Mother. You did that at Thanksgiving dinner. I'm simply trying to survive." She hung up without another word. 2 days later, Rosalind called with news. The trademark applications had been approved on an expedited basis. My recipes now legally belonged to me. January 1st arrived, marking the official transfer of Whitmore Bakeries to Preston's leadership. It also marked the launch of Josephine's Heritage Baking. I had rented a small commercial kitchen space in a converted warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every surface, every piece of equipment, every ingredient represented my investment in myself. My first employee was someone unexpected. Her name was Cordelia Whitmore, my aunt, who had been the only family member to show me any sympathy at Thanksgiving. "I can't watch Preston destroy what Harold built," she said, standing in my tiny kitchen. "I've resigned from the family board. I want to help you." I was suspicious at first. Why would she abandon the family that had just closed ranks against me? "Because I know something Constance didn't tell you," Cordelia explained. "Harold changed his will 3 months before he died. He wanted to leave the company to you directly. Constance had the lawyers bury it in probate court. The will that was executed was an older version." She handed me a copy of the document. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. My father had tried to protect me, and my mother had made sure his wishes would never be honored. The revelation about my father's will changed everything. Rosalind filed a challenge in probate court immediately. But she warned me that these cases could take years to resolve, especially with the resources my mother could throw at fighting it. "We need to build your business in the meantime," she advised. "The stronger you become independently, the better your negotiating position." I threw myself into work with a focus I had never experienced before. Without the constraints of Whitmore Bakery's traditional approach, I was free to experiment. I developed new recipes that built on my original creations. I focused on organic, locally sourced ingredients that commanded premium prices. I created a brand identity that emphasized craft and authenticity over mass production. By February, I had outgrown my tiny kitchen. By March, I had secured a small business loan and moved into a proper production facility. By April, Josephine's Heritage Baking products were on shelves in 200 stores across 3 states. Meanwhile, reports from my former colleagues at Whitmore Bakeries painted a grim picture. Sales were down 18%. Employee turnover had tripled. Preston had already fired 2 experienced managers who questioned his decisions. My mother's empire was crumbling, and she still had no idea how bad things would get. The first direct confrontation came in May. I was setting up our booth at a regional food expo when I saw Preston walking toward me, his face red with anger. "You need to stop this," he hissed, loud enough for nearby vendors to hear. "You're ruining our family." "I'm building my own business with my own recipes," I replied calmly. "There's nothing illegal about that. Those recipes belong to Whitmore Bakeries. You developed them while you worked for us." "Actually, I developed them in my own kitchen, on my own time, before I became an employee. I have the documentation to prove it." His eyes narrowed. "Mother's lawyers will destroy you." "They're welcome to try. I have excellent representation." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Preston seemed to realize he was making a scene. He leaned in close. "You were never really one of us, Josephine. Everyone knows that." I smiled. "You're right, I was always better." He stormed off, and I returned to setting up my booth. By the end of the expo, I had secured 7 new retail partnerships. Summer brought expansion, and challenges in equal measure. My team had grown to 15 employees, many of them former Whitmore Bakery staff who had quit in frustration with Preston's leadership. Each one brought institutional knowledge that helped me refine my operations. But growth required capital, and my resources were stretched thin. That's when I received an unexpected call from Vivian Kerrigan, CEO of a major food conglomerate that owned dozens of brands nationwide. "I've been watching your progress," Vivian said. "Your products are exceptional, and your growth trajectory is remarkable. I'd like to discuss an investment opportunity." My first instinct was suspicion. Was this another trap? Was my mother somehow behind this? But Rosalind investigated Vivian's company thoroughly. There were no connections to Whitmore Bakeries or my family. The offer was genuine. After weeks of negotiation, we reached an agreement. Vivian's company would invest $3 million in exchange for a minority stake and distribution access to their national network. The deal valued Josephine's heritage baking at $12 million. Just 8 months after I had been told I wasn't good enough to carry the Whitmore name. The investment announcement made industry headlines. Former Whitmore executive launches competing brand with major backing. Heritage baking startup threatens regional bakery giant. Disowned daughter's company valued at 8 figures. My phone exploded with interview requests, partnership inquiries, and messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be associated with my success. But the message that mattered most came from an unexpected source. "Congratulations, Josephine. Your father would be proud." It was signed simply CW. Cordelia had been right. Not everyone in my family wished me harm. Some of them had simply been too afraid to speak up. The week after the announcement, I received legal notice that my mother was filing a lawsuit against Josephine's heritage, baking for theft of trade secrets and unfair competition. The battle I had been preparing for had finally begun. Rosalind wasn't worried. "They have no case. Your documentation is impeccable, but they're hopping to bleed you dry through legal fees." "Then we'll make sure they run out of blood first," I replied. The lawsuit was a disaster for Whitmore Bakeries. During discovery, my lawyers obtained internal documents showing that my mother had known about my father's updated will and had deliberately suppressed it. We found emails discussing how to remove my name from company records. We found board meeting minutes where Preston had admitted he couldn't replicate my recipes. The judge allowed us to file a countersuit for fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. Meanwhile, my business continued to thrive, while Whitmore Bakeries continued to struggle. By October, their flagship location had closed. By November, 3 more had followed. Industry analysts were openly questioning whether the company could survive another year. My mother's lawyers reached out to discuss settlement. "She wants to end this quietly," Rosalind reported. "She's offering to drop the lawsuit and pay your legal fees in exchange for you dropping the countersuit and agreeing to never publicly discuss the family dispute." I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. No, I want my father's wishes honored. I want the truth about what she did made public, and I want the Whitmore name. The settlement negotiations were brutal. My mother refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. She refused to honor my father's real will. She refused to give me anything that might suggest she had been wrong. But her bargaining position weakened with every passing week. Whitmore Bakeries was hemorrhaging money. The lawsuit was costing a fortune in legal fees. Preston had proven catastrophically incompetent, alienating customers and employees alike. And I had something my mother hadn't anticipated: public sympathy. My story had spread through industry circles and beyond. The tale of a devoted daughter, cast out for not being a blood relative, who had built her own empire in response, resonated with people who had faced similar rejection. Support poured in from unexpected places. Former Whitmore customers began seeking out my products specifically. Industry publications wrote favorable profiles. Social media turned me into something of a folk hero. In December, exactly 1 year after my termination, my mother's lawyers made a new offer. "She's willing to acknowledge Harold's updated will," Rosalind informed me. "She'll pay you the inheritance he intended, approximately $2 million, and she'll transfer ownership of the Whitmore trademark to you." I read the offer 3 times, certain I had misunderstood. "She's giving me the trademark." "She has no choice," Rosalind explained. "The company is essentially worthless now. The brand has been so damaged by this scandal that the name is a liability. She's hoping you'll take it and leave her alone." The irony was almost too perfect to believe. My mother had told me I wasn't good enough to carry the Whitmore name. Now, she was literally giving that name to me because she had destroyed its value. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt sad. Sad for my father, who had built something wonderful only to watch his wife destroy it. Sad for the employees who had lost their jobs because of Preston's incompetence. Sad for the legacy that could have continued for generations if pride hadn't gotten in the way. but I also felt determined. The Whitmore name meant something once, I told Rosalind. It can mean something again. We accepted the settlement with one additional condition: a public statement acknowledging that I had been wrongly terminated and that my father's wishes had been deliberately ignored. The press conference was held in January, almost exactly 14 months after my Thanksgiving humiliation. I stood at a podium in the lobby of my new headquarters, surrounded by my employees, partners, and supporters. Cameras flashed as I announced the merger of Josephine's Heritage Baking and the Whitmore Trademark. The new company would be called Whitmore Heritage Baking. It would honor my father's legacy while building on my innovations. It would combine the best of what both names represented. Behind me, mounted on the wall, was my father's original business license from 35 years ago. Next to it was a copy of his updated will, finally honored after a year of fighting. My mother was not present. Neither was Preston. Their lawyers had issued a brief statement acknowledging the settlement terms, but they had refused to make any public appearances. I didn't need them there. What I needed was to honor the man who had raised me, believed in me, and tried to protect me even after his death. Dad always said that a recipe is more than ingredients, I told the assembled crowd. It's a story. Today, I'm continuing that story. The first year of Whitmore Heritage Baking exceeded every projection. With the combined resources of my successful startup and the Whitmore brand recognition, we expanded to 40 locations across 8 states. Our products were now sold in over 2,000 stores nationwide. We had become one of the fastest-growing food companies in the country. But success wasn't just measured in numbers. I had created a company culture that valued every employee, regardless of their background or bloodline. I had established scholarships for culinary students from non-traditional families. I had proven that family is about love and dedication, not DNA. My Aunt Cordelia became my chief operating officer, bringing decades of experience and a genuine commitment to doing things right. Several of my cousins, the ones who had texted me secretly after Thanksgiving, eventually joined the company as well. Not everyone from my family reached out. My mother and Preston remained distant, living off whatever remained of their personal assets. I heard through relatives that Preston had moved to another state, trying to escape the reputation he had earned. I didn't wish them ill. I simply didn't think about them much anymore. My energy was focused on building, not on revenge. On the second anniversary of that Thanksgiving dinner, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My mother stood in the doorway, looking smaller than I remembered. The rigid posture had softened. The imperious expression had faded. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I gestured to a chair across from my desk. She sat carefully, her eyes taking in the photos on my walls, the awards on my shelves, the evidence of everything I had built. "I underestimated you," she said finally. "I thought without the family support you would fail. I was wrong." I waited, unsure where this was going. "Harold always said you were special, that you had gifts Preston would never have. I didn't want to believe him. I thought blood was what mattered." She paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "I've lost everything. My son won't speak to me. My relatives have distanced themselves. The legacy I tried to protect is gone, and the daughter I rejected built something greater than I ever could." I considered my response carefully. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to list every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment she had made me feel less than human, to make her understand exactly how much pain she had caused. But what would that accomplish? I thought about my father, who had loved me unconditionally despite knowing I wasn't his biological child. I thought about his letter, urging me to remember that no piece of paper could define my worth. I thought about the person I wanted to be. "I'm not going to pretend everything is fine," I said finally. "What you did was cruel and wrong. You tried to erase me from a family I had given everything to." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "But I'm also not going to carry hatred forever. It's too heavy, and I have too much to build." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I had transformed rejection into success. "You're not welcome in my company," I continued. "That trust is broken. But I won't stop you from reaching out to family members who might be willing to rebuild a relationship." My mother left that day without asking for anything more. Whether she would truly change, I couldn't say. But I had made my peace with the situation. The following year brought continued growth. Whitmore Heritage Baking became a nationally recognized brand. We were featured in major publications. I was invited to speak at business schools about resilience and entrepreneurship. But my proudest moment came at a small ceremony at our original location. I unveiled a plaque dedicated to Harold Whitmore, the man who had taught me that family is built through love, not blood. The man who had believed in me when no one else did. Among the attendees were employees, partners, industry colleagues, and even some Whitmore relatives who had found the courage to reconnect. "My father used to say that every recipe tells a story," I said, standing before the crowd. "His story was about building something meaningful and sharing it with people he loved. My story is about carrying that forward." I looked at the faces around me, people who had become my true family through years of shared struggle and triumph. "He would be proud of what we've built together." Today, 5 years after being told I wasn't good enough to carry the Whitmore name, I sit in the corner office of our national headquarters. The trademark certificate hangs on my wall, a daily reminder that identity is what we create, not what we're given. Below it is my father's letter, framed and preserved, the most valuable document I own. Whitmore Heritage Baking now operates in 20 states. We employ over 300 people. We've donated millions to culinary education and family advocacy programs. But none of those achievements mean as much as the simple truth I discovered through all of this. My worth was never determined by biology or bloodlines. It was determined by my character, my work, and my refusal to let others define me. My mother tried to strip away my identity with a DNA test and a public humiliation. Instead, she gave me the motivation to build something she could never take away. The Whitmore name is now legally mine. But more importantly, I've discovered that the most powerful name I carry is the one I've built for myself. Josephine, a daughter who refused to disappear, a businesswoman who turned betrayal into success, a legacy that will continue for generations. My father was right. A recipe is more than ingredients. It's a story. This is mine,